Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about a word we hear all the time, trauma. It's something that touches so many lives, but what does it really mean? In this explainer, we're going to break down what trauma is, how it affects us, and most importantly, the path toward healing.
So, let's start with a really fundamental question. What actually makes an event traumatic? It's not always as straightforward as you might think. Is it the event itself, or is it our personal reaction to it? That's what we're here to figure out.
Okay, so to get our footing, let's look at how the American Psychological Association puts it. They define trauma simply as an emotional response to a terrible event. That word response, that's the key right there. It immediately shifts the focus from just the external thing that happened to a person to a person's own internal experience.
And building on that, here's the more official definition. Trauma is a response to something a person finds threatening or harmful. And what it does is it leaves them feeling totally overwhelmed, helpless, or just shocked. It's a deeply, deeply personal reaction.
And this is so important to understand. You could have two people go through the exact same stressful event, and one might develop trauma while the other doesn't. Our responses are completely unique to us, which is exactly why trauma is never a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. So that brings us to our first section. Because trauma isn't just one thing, it can show up in a lot of different ways. Let's take a look at the many phases it can have.
Okay, so one way to think about trauma is by how long it lasts. On one hand, you have acute trauma. This is from a single isolated event, like a car accident or a natural disaster. But on the other hand, you have chronic trauma, which is the result of repeated, prolonged stress. Think of things like ongoing bullying or domestic violence.
And it gets even more layered. There's what's called complex trauma, which is when someone is exposed to multiple different traumatic events, creating this really tangled web of responses. And then there's secondary or vicarious trauma. This one is fascinating. It's when you actually start developing trauma symptoms just from being in close contact with a survivor. It really shows you how trauma can ripple outwards, affecting not just one person, but family, friends, and even first responders.
So just how common is this? Well, according to the World Health Organization, a staggering 70% of people, 70, will experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. That number alone shows you why this conversation is just so vital for all of us.
And when you look at what can cause trauma, wow, the list is just incredibly broad. It's such a powerful reminder that trauma isn't just limited to the things we see in movies like combat or big disasters. It can come from bullying, a traumatic childbirth, the sudden loss of someone you love, or a serious health diagnosis. It really reinforces that it's the personal response that defines it.
So, how does all this actually show up in our lives? Well, the responses tend to fall into three main buckets. You've got the emotional side, things like anger, fear, or shame. Then there's the psychological stuff, like confusion, flashbacks, or nightmares. And believe it or not, it can even show up physically, through things like headaches, constant fatigue, or a racing heart.
And there's one physical state we really need to talk about, and that's hyperarousal. You can think of it like the body's alarm system getting stuck in the on decision. You're basically in a constant state of high alert, like you're always in fight or flight mode. It can make you feel jumpy, on edge, and make it almost impossible to just relax or get a good night's sleep.
Now, for a lot of people, these responses to trauma do fade over time. But what happens when they don't? What if they stick around? Well, that brings us to our next section, where we're going to dive into post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. This is the million-dollar question, right? Tons of people experience traumatic stress, but not everyone develops PTSD. So where is that line? When does a natural human response to a terrible event cross over into a clinical diagnosis?
So here are the main things that really define PTSD. First, the symptoms have to stick around for at least a month, and they often include things like severe anxiety and flashbacks. A huge part of it is avoidance, where a person actively tries to steer clear of anything that reminds them of the event. And maybe the most important piece of the puzzle is that the symptoms have to be significantly messing with their daily life. It's that combination of time, severity, and real-world impact that makes it a diagnosis. Now this chart, this gives us some really crucial perspective. We already know that about 70% of people will experience a trauma. But look at this, only a small fraction of them, somewhere between about 6 and 9%, actually go on to develop PTSD. And that's a really reassuring and important fact. Going through something traumatic does not automatically mean you will get PTSD. Okay, now for what is honestly the most important part of this whole conversation, healing. The really good news here is that there are incredibly effective professional treatments out there. So let's look at some of the paths that can make a genuine difference. There are so many different paths to healing because what works for one person might not work for another. Some therapies, like cognitive processing therapy, really focus on helping you reframe your thoughts about what happened. Others, like EMDR, use things like eye movements to help your brain process memories that have gotten stuck. And then you've got approaches like writing or somatic therapies, which tap into that powerful mind-body connection. The great thing is that this variety means treatment can really be tailored to you. And on top of therapy, medication can be another really important tool in the toolkit. For some people, medications like SSRIs can be a game changer for managing related symptoms like anxiety and depression. And that can make it so much easier to really dive in and get the most out of the therapy process.
Now, beyond professional treatment, there's actually a ton we can do to support our own recovery. So this final section is all about empowering ourselves through self-care and building up our own resilience.
This table breaks down 4 really powerful strategies. Take exercise. It's not just for your body, it can actively reduce PTSD symptoms. Mindfulness is all about pulling us out of replaying the past and grounding us right here in the present. Social connection. That's one of the most effective shields we have against the isolating effects of trauma. And finally, making quality sleep a priority directly fights back against that hyperarousal we talked about, giving your nervous system a chance to rest and recover. If you take one thing away from all of this, let it be this. It is always okay to ask for help. Always. If symptoms are getting in the way of your life, your work, your relationships, reaching out to a professional is not a sign of weakness. It is a courageous, critical step toward healing. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Seeking professional help is about learning how to manage your symptoms and your emotions in a healthy way. It's about getting the tools you need to move forward.
It's so important to remember that healing from trauma is a journey. It's not some destination with a finish line you cross. But with the right mix of support and personal strategies, it is absolutely possible to manage your symptoms and truly improve your quality of life.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to take with you. Now that we understand this a little better, how can we use this knowledge to be more supportive, both to ourselves and to the people in our own lives who might be on this path to healing? Thank you so much for joining this explainer.